The cold night air bit at Lieutenant Maria Greer's exposed skin as she stood at the edge of the military base's landing pad. Her boots crunched against the frost-covered concrete, the rhythmic sound drowned by the roar of distant engines. Above, a streak of light shattered the ink-black sky, cutting through the clouds with terrifying speed. It wasn't just any meteor shower. This was no ordinary visitor. The arrival had been flagged only hours ago, a ripple in the deep space signals that the base's high-tech radar systems picked up. A ship, massive and alien, hurtling toward Earth. Maria's heart hammered against her ribcage, not out of fear, but because the unknown had always been the thing that intrigued her the most. She wasn't one for hesitation. That was the kind of mindset that got people killed. Her hand hovered near the sidearm strapped to her hip as the glow of the ship's descent illuminated the perimeter. The base was on high alert, soldiers rushing to their posts, but Maria stood still. Her eyes locked on the streak of light that had now grown into something far more substantial, its outline becoming sharp as it descended. It had no traditional wings or engines. No recognizable shape. She couldn't stop the chill that ran down her spine. This was different. The ship's thrusters flared bright, shaking the ground beneath her feet. It landed with a force that sent a ripple through the air. The lights above flickered, casting everything in an eerie silence before the sound of boots hitting the metal floor broke the tension. "Lieutenant Greer." The voice was familiar, but not comforting. Colonel Harper, his voice tight, stood beside her, his eyes scanning the looming structure in front of them. "We need you inside. Now." Maria nodded, her fingers clenching slightly around her weapon. "I'll stay here. You'll need someone with tactical experience to handle whatever this is." Harper met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Maria, this is beyond anything we've ever trained for. We don't know what's coming." "I'm aware," she replied curtly, not shifting her gaze from the ship. "But this is why I'm here." The alien ship's door slid open with a mechanical hiss, and for the first time, Maria allowed herself to breathe in deeply, though the air felt thin, unnatural. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, the low hum of the unknown pressing against her chest. Out of the darkened interior stepped a figure, a towering presence, silhouetted against the interior lights of the ship. The figure was humanoid, but not human. The armor he wore gleamed with an unsettling metallic sheen, intricate designs etched across the surface. His height, at least 2 heads above Maria, was paired with a build that could only be described as intimidating, even monstrous. Yet, there was an undeniable grace to his movement. "Who the hell is that?" Harper whispered, barely audible, yet still carrying the weight of years of training. Maria didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. Instead, her heart skipped a beat as their gazes locked. His eyes, an unsettling shade of silver, reflecting the glow of his ship, stared back at her. For a split second, there was no tension. No orders. No protocol. Just a piercing gaze that seemed to see straight through her. "Human!" His voice rumbled, deep and deliberate, resonating in the air like the sound of distant thunder. Maria's stomach tightened. The words were not a question, they were a command. "I insist you inspect my body!" The command struck her like a physical blow. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Her military training screamed at her to be cautious, to prepare for an attack. But the alien's presence seemed different. There was an undeniable aura about him, something beyond the raw physicality. There was a strange energy that resonated from him, a kind of power that pulsed through the air between them. Maria cleared her throat, her voice coming out sharper than she intended. "I beg your pardon?" The alien stepped forward, closing the gap between them with one fluid motion. His armor clinked, a low, metallic sound, but it was his aura that held her captive. She could feel the heat emanating from him, unnatural, yet comforting in a way she couldn't explain. His gaze never wavered, though she could see the slight flicker of something. Curiosity? Defiance? In his eyes. "I said," he repeated, his tone unwavering, "I require you to inspect my body." The command left no room for refusal, yet Maria's mind raced, trying to process the meaning behind it. The way he spoke, demanding, but not threatening, was enough to make her hesitate. Was this some kind of test? A cultural practice? Or was it something more personal? Regardless, she needed to act fast. She couldn't afford to let the situation spiral out of control. "Are you out of your mind?" she said, her voice steady, though confusion swirled in her chest. She scanned his body, noting the advanced tech that adorned his figure. This was no random alien, no mere scout. This was a warrior, a being of immense power. His eyes softened ever so slightly. "You misunderstand, human. I do not require your inspection in the way you believe. I seek your judgment, your assessment. My species has learned through centuries of struggle that we must prove ourselves worthy to those who are stronger." Maria took a step back, her heart thudding painfully against her ribs. "You're asking me to, what? Assess you?" "Yes," he replied, his voice steady, as if the task he presented was the simplest request in the universe. "You will evaluate my strength, my endurance, my capacity to withstand your species' challenge. Only then will I know if your world is worthy of my alliance." Maria paused, running a hand through her short, wind-tangled hair. Her mind swirled with 1,000 thoughts. This wasn't a simple contact mission. This was an encounter of power. Her training, her instinct, told her to refuse, but there was something about this alien, something about the way he carried himself, that made her hesitate. "Why me?" she asked quietly, her voice betraying a hint of curiosity that she hadn't intended to reveal. "Because," the alien said, his voice low and deliberate, "I see in you what I seek in your kind. Strength beyond the body. Willpower beyond measure. And perhaps something more." Maria stared into his eyes, searching for an answer she didn't yet understand. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her shoulders. Every instinct told her this was only the beginning. And then the world seemed to stop as she heard herself say it. "All right. I'll do it." The alien's expression softened, a fraction of a smile tugging at his lips. "Then prepare yourself, human," he said. "The trial begins now." The tension between Maria and the alien hung thick in the crisp night air as she stood across from him, the cold metal of the landing pad beneath her feet. His imposing figure was still, silent, like a mountain carved from stone. The very presence of the alien warrior seemed to demand something more than mere attention, as if the space between them had suddenly contracted into a battleground of wills. She knew she had made the right decision, but her heart still thrummed with unease. She wasn't afraid. She couldn't afford to be. But there was something about him, something that held her in place, an almost hypnotic force in his gaze. His silvery eyes burned with the weight of an expectation Maria wasn't yet ready to understand. "So this is it?" she asked, her voice sharp but steady, betraying none of the anxiety she felt beneath the surface. Arvak, the alien warrior who had crashed onto her world, regarded her with that unreadable expression. His dark, intricate armor shimmered faintly in the light, revealing hidden symbols etched into the surface, ancient and unreadable to any human eye. The silence stretched between them, and Maria's instincts screamed that he was waiting for her to decide how to approach the challenge he had imposed. "Yes," Arvak replied, his deep voice vibrating through the air. "This is where it begins. You will judge my worth as you see fit. No more words, no more games. Only actions." A strange, taut line ran through his words, one that made Maria's stomach tighten with curiosity. What was he truly after? Not just a test of strength, he said it himself. Something more. Maria's gaze flicked over his form, assessing him. His body was a mass of controlled power, muscles rippling even beneath the armor. The way he stood, the confidence in his posture, made it clear that he wasn't just an alien, he was a being of discipline, of rigorous training. His presence dominated, filling the air like a storm waiting to break. She swallowed, steadying her breath. If she was to face him, she needed to be clear-headed. Her duty as a lieutenant was clear: she was to protect humanity, not cower before some otherworldly force. But this wasn't just any alien encounter. Arvak wasn't here to invade. His words hinted at something else, an offer, Or perhaps an ultimatum. A test, yes, but of what? Maria needed answers. I'll judge you, she said, trying to steady her voice. She took a step forward closer to him. But you need to explain exactly what this trial is. Why me? Why Earth? A flicker of something passed across his expression. An emotion? Regret? But it vanished too quickly for Maria to be certain. Because you are strong, Lieutenant, he said, and for the first time, there was a softness to his tone that caught her off guard. Your world has withstood much, and yet it endures. Your species has been tested in ways you do not fully understand, and I need to see if that strength can be trusted. Maria's eyebrows furrowed. What do you mean? Tested how? Your resilience. Your humanity. I have seen the stars burn and civilizations fall. But Earth, you have something different. Something that is not born of mere physical strength. The true strength lies within your will. Your heart, Arvok said, his voice lowering as he took a step toward her. The distance between them seemed to close, but Maria didn't flinch. That is what I need to know. His words lingered, wrapping around her like a dense fog, leaving her with more questions than answers. Willpower? Resilience? Maria wasn't sure if he was praising humanity or undermining them. She clenched her fists, suddenly feeling the weight of his gaze like a 1,000-pound anchor. He stepped back, his movements fluid, almost predatory. This is no simple test of endurance, Arvok continued. It is a test of your kind's soul. You will fight me, and I will see what drives you. If your spirit is strong enough, I will consider your species worthy. The challenge rang in the air like a thunderclap. Fight him? Now? Maria's pulse quickened. This wasn't some ceremonial assessment. It was real. A battle. One that would either prove humanity's worth, or seal their fate. She turned away from him, forcing herself to remain calm. This wasn't about her. This was about Earth's future. Every instinct screamed at her to prepare for the worst, but something about Arvok's calm demeanor, his relentless confidence, left her conflicted. She knew what this meant: either she succeeded, or she failed, and everything her species had worked for could be destroyed in the blink of an eye. The soldiers who had been waiting nearby kept their distance, but Maria could feel their gaze on her, each one of them expecting her to be the one to protect their world. The air seemed to freeze, the cold seeping through her uniform. It was a tangible thing now, this expectation, weighing her down, locking her in place. Do not mistake my patience for weakness. Arvok's voice broke through her thoughts, low and forceful. You will find that my kind does not bend. We do not fall under pressure. If you are not prepared, step back now. There will be no shame. Maria stiffened. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. You'll get your fight, she muttered, taking a step forward again. But be warned, humanity doesn't go down easily. For the first time, Arvok's lips curled into a faint smile, a smile that was both knowing and dangerously confident. I would not expect anything less. The atmosphere seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension, the battle lines drawn without a single weapon being drawn. Maria felt the energy in the air, felt the intensity of the challenge pressing against her chest. She reached down, her fingers brushing against her sidearm, but she knew it would do little against the alien warrior. She didn't need a weapon to fight this fight. Without another word, Arvok moved first. His speed was incredible, almost too fast to track, his body a blur of motion as he closed the gap between them. Maria instinctively ducked, narrowly avoiding his strike. The ground beneath her feet rumbled as his fist collided with the spot she had occupied a heartbeat ago. The impact reverberated through the pad, sending tremors through her bones. She had barely enough time to think. She pushed herself to the side, her heart pounding in her ears, adrenaline spiking through her veins. This was real. He was real. And this trial wasn't just about strength, it was about survival. As she faced Arvok again, sweat beading on her brow, a sudden realization dawned. This was no longer just a test of her will. It was a test of everything she had, everything she was willing to sacrifice. With a sharp intake of breath, Maria raised her stance. The fight had only just begun. The cold night air bit sharply at Maria's exposed skin as she darted to the side, barely avoiding another brutal strike from Arvok. His fists were like wrecking balls, each punch sending shockwaves through the ground. The alien warrior's speed was overwhelming, a blur of strength that seemed to tear at the fabric of the air itself. Yet Maria's mind remained laser-focused, every move calculated, every muscle firing with precision. This wasn't just a test of physicality. It was a test of her spirit. She had expected a fight. She hadn't expected it to be this hard. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her legs burning from the strain of evading his relentless blows. She was human, fragile compared to him. He was a force of nature, and she was just one woman standing between him and the future of Earth. She had trained for moments like this, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer force of Arvok. As she rolled away from another strike, her thoughts raced. Why had she agreed to this? What was this alien truly seeking? Every moment she spent in his presence, she could feel the weight of the test, of his unspoken expectations. His words echoed in her mind, "I seek to know if your kind is worthy." Maria didn't flinch as Arvok advanced again. Instead, she planted her feet firmly on the ground and faced him. The next move had to be hers. She could feel her heart pounding, her body fatigued, but she refused to let fear control her. Fear was weakness. The one thing that had defined humanity in the face of countless adversities was its resilience, the capacity to push through, to find strength even when all hope seemed lost. With a swift motion, she closed the gap between them, using the momentum of her run to launch herself toward his chest. Arvok reacted too quickly. His hand shot out, grabbing her by the wrist mid-strike, his grip like iron. She couldn't move. Her arm screamed in protest, but she forced herself to look him in the eye, to steady herself. Arvok's expression shifted, the fierce determination in his gaze softening for a moment, as if recognizing the challenge that she presented. His lips twitched slightly. "You fight with conviction. That is good," he said, his deep voice rumbling low in the quiet night. "But do not mistake courage for foolishness." Maria didn't respond, instead focusing on the feeling of his grip, calculating her next move. His strength was overwhelming, but her training had taught her how to work with disadvantage. She twisted her body, trying to leverage her position against him, but the alien's grip tightened, lifting her from the ground with ease. "You are tired," Arvok observed, his voice oddly compassionate despite the situation. "I can see the strain in your eyes. You fight, but your body is no longer keeping up." Maria clenched her jaw, unwilling to let him see the toll it was taking on her. "I'll keep fighting. Until the end." Arvok's gaze softened even further. His hand released her wrist, setting her down gently on the ground, though the warmth of his touch lingered longer than she expected. His eyes scanned her face, almost as if reading her, trying to gauge her resolve. "You still think you can win?" "I think I have to," Maria replied firmly, standing straighter despite the exhaustion in her limbs. He tilted his head, watching her carefully. "That is the heart of humanity, isn't it?" he murmured, almost to himself. "Refusing to give up, even when all logic says you should." Maria didn't know how to respond to that. Was it a compliment? A challenge? It was becoming clearer with every passing second that Arvok wasn't simply testing her physical strength. No, he was testing her will, her heart. And that realization struck her with brutal force. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking slightly as she pushed against the ground to regain her balance. "We fight not just to survive, but to protect everything we hold dear. Our people. Our homes. Our future." A flash of something, respect, crossed Arvok's face, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "That is what I need to see. It is not just the body, but the mind and soul that determine if your kind is worthy." Maria's chest tightened as the weight of his words sank in. This was about more than Earth's survival. This was about humanity's very essence. If she couldn't prove that, then what was left? Would their species fall, wiped from the galaxy for their inability to rise to the challenge? Her thoughts were interrupted as Arvok took a step back, his eyes flicking toward the distant horizon. The storm that had been brewing in the distance seemed to mirror the brewing tension between them. Arvok's voice was low when he spoke again, almost as if it was meant for him, not for her. "There is more to this test than you know, Maria Greer," he said, his tone thoughtful. "You have not yet faced the true challenge." Her brow furrowed, confusion and suspicion gnawing at her. "What are you talking about?" Arvok paused, his gaze flicking to the ship behind him. He seemed to weigh his words carefully before speaking again. "I did not bring you here to merely fight me. I brought you here because I need to know if you can stand for all of humanity, not just yourself. Can you make the ultimate sacrifice?" Maria's heart skipped a beat at the implication, and she took a step toward him, her eyes narrowing. "Sacrifice?" she repeated. "What do you mean by that?" He was silent for a moment, his silver eyes watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "If your species is to survive, you must be willing to risk everything. Not just your body, but your soul. Can you make that choice?" She froze. Risk everything? What was he asking? Was he asking her to betray her people? To surrender? Her mind raced, but she couldn't grasp the depth of the question. The realization that the stakes were higher than her survival alone made her stomach churn. What do you need from me?" Maria asked, her voice barely a whisper. Arvok's gaze remained unwavering. "I need to know if humanity has the strength to overcome what is coming. If you are the one to lead them. To guide them to a new era." Her pulse quickened as she realized the true weight of the situation. This wasn't just about a trial of strength or survival. This was about the future of her entire species. The decision would not be hers alone. It would ripple through the lives of everyone she knew. Maria's mind reeled, and she opened her mouth to speak but was cut off by a distant rumble, an ominous sound that seemed to shake the ground itself. Her eyes widened as she turned toward the horizon. The storm had grown, and it wasn't just weather. There was something else out there. Something that made her blood run cold. The trial wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. The air around Maria seemed to crackle with an intensity that matched the storm brewing on the horizon. The distant rumble reverberated through the ground, a low, thunderous warning that only seemed to grow louder. Arvok stood silently beside her, his towering form casting a long shadow over the landing pad. The tension between them was palpable, thick with the unspoken weight of the challenge that had unfolded over the past hours. Maria had thought she understood the test. She had believed that her will, her strength, and her humanity would be the measure of whether she, or humanity, was worthy of survival. But now, with the storm threatening, with Arvok's cryptic words echoing in her mind, she realized that she was not just fighting for her life, but for everything Earth had ever stood for. "Are you ready?" Arvok's voice broke through her thoughts, steady and unwavering. Maria turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest, but her gaze was clear. "I was ready the moment I stepped onto this ground," she said, her voice firm, though the uncertainty she felt still lingered beneath the surface. Arvok's eyes glinted with something unreadable, admiration, perhaps, or something more. "Then we shall see." A sudden gust of wind swept through the landing pad, the hairs on Maria's arms standing on end as the temperature dropped. She looked up, the clouds swirling in the distance, dark and foreboding, as though the very heavens were reacting to the tension between them. The air felt thick, heavy, laden with something beyond just a storm. The storm was a metaphor. A warning. Arvok's voice broke through the air again, deeper this time, with an edge of finality. "The trial is not just of strength, Maria Greer. It is of sacrifice, of heart. To survive this test, you must choose not just to fight, but to risk everything. Do you understand?" Maria's brow furrowed, the gravity of his words weighing on her. "Risk everything? What does that mean?" she demanded, a flicker of panic rising in her chest. She had fought him. She had faced her fears. But now the stakes were no longer just her survival. Now, she was being asked to make a choice that could determine the fate of humanity. Arvok stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. To choose the future over yourself, he said softly. To place the needs of your species above your own desires. This is what defines your kind, your ability to make hard choices. To sacrifice for the greater good. The wind picked up again, howling through the empty expanse of the landing pad. Maria's thoughts raced. She had fought for survival, for her people, but this was different. This was asking her to give up something that defined her, her own life, her own future, for a cause greater than herself. How am I supposed to do that? Her voice was barely a whisper, the question more to herself than to him. The weight of it threatened to crush her, but she knew, deep down, there was no turning back now. She had to make the choice. Her heart pounded, her mind whirling. Arvok's gaze softened, and for a moment, Maria saw something more than the alien warrior in front of her. There was an understanding, a recognition of the weight she carried. You already know how, he said quietly. Your kind has always known. It is not the physical strength that will decide this trial. It is your heart. The heart of humanity. The storm was now closer, the winds howling with an almost sentient fury. The tension in the air was suffocating. Maria could feel the pulse of the moment when the world, her world, would shift forever. Could she make the sacrifice? Could she put her faith in something greater than herself? Arvok stepped back, giving her space. When the storm reaches us, he said, his voice calm despite the chaos building around them, you will have to make a choice. Your life, or the survival of your species. The storm is a trial in itself. The storm is my final test. Maria's heart skipped a beat. The storm? What did he mean by that? Before she could ask, the sky seemed to split open. A flash of blinding light lit up the clouds, followed by an ear-splitting crack of thunder. The ground beneath them trembled, and the wind rose to a deafening roar. Maria staggered, her body pushed back by the force of the gusts. She dug her feet into the earth, but it felt as though the world was shaking beneath her. Make your choice! Arvok's voice boomed over the storm, his figure barely visible against the blinding light. Maria's thoughts raced. What was she supposed to do? Was this the final test? She had already proven herself strong. She had fought. She had stood her ground. But this was something else entirely. Something that demanded more than physical strength. She could feel it, the pull of the choice. To step forward and fight for herself, to continue on the path of survival, would be the easier choice. But would it be the right one? Her mind flashed to her family, her friends, the world she had always known. Could she really walk away from it all? Could she sacrifice everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for a chance to save humanity? The storm intensified. The ground shook beneath her feet. She could feel the raw power of the storm, the unrelenting force of nature, pressing against her. The choice was hers. Her heart raced, her pulse pounding in her ears. In that moment, Maria realized the truth. The real test wasn't just about survival. It was about love, for her people, for her world, for everything that made her human. The strength wasn't just physical. It was the willingness to give up her own desires for the greater good. To protect the future of humanity, even if it meant sacrificing her own. She looked at Arvok, his figure standing in the midst of the storm, waiting for her decision. The question hung in the air, the weight of it pressing down on her like a physical force. Maria took a deep breath, her heart steadying as she made her choice. She stepped forward, her feet planted firmly on the ground, her gaze unwavering. I choose humanity, she said, her voice ringing out over the storm. Arvok's expression softened, the tension in his posture easing. Then you are worthy. And as the storm roared around them, Maria realized that this was just the beginning. She had made her choice, but the consequences were yet to come.